everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so very much for stopping by. All right, so Trisha Paytas. She's recently been making videos while socially isolating like the rest of us at home, and a few of those videos, maybe a couple, featured her wearing a wig of dreadlocks, which isn't really sitting well with a lot of people. Trisha's recent dreadlock mini controversy posed a question in my mind. Is it in fact cultural appropriation when someone not of color, specifically not of African origins, sports a dreadlock hairstyle or wig or weave, extensions, whatever? Do dreadlocks in fact belong to one particular culture? For those of you who are new to this channel, I am a lawyer, so I do tend to play devil's advocate and argue both sides of a case. So I'm not taking sides. I'm merely arguing both sides because it's what I do. Now, a lot of people believe that dreadlocks are in fact a part of African culture. I was very surprised to find out that that is in fact not the case. Dreadlocks are essentially entangled locks of hair achieved through various means of rolling hair. It's hard to tell who had them first, because early humans, lacking combs or styling products, probably roamed the planet with matted hair. Multiple sources credit the Vedic, I don't know if I'm saying that right, the Vedic scriptures of Indian origin with documenting the first evidence of twisted locks of hair as early as 1800 BC. Historians and anthropologists have found evidence of the dew in ancient Egypt, Germanic tribes, Vikings, Pacific Islanders, early Christians, the Aborigines, and the New Guineans, as well as the Somali, the Gala, the Maasai, the Ashanti, and the Fulani tribes of Africa. As University of Richmond professor Bert Ash writes in Twisted, My Dreadlock Chronicles, the better question is, who hasn't worn dreadlocks at one time or another? So, to answer the first question of, are dreadlocks of African origin, it looks like the answer is no. So if you're opposed to people donning the dreadlock look purely based off that argument, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't look like it's a valid argument. Before I researched the topic, I had this discussion with someone else. What if you're just a fan of something and you just really like the way something looks on someone else and you're like, hey, I want to try that. It looks really cool. Is that then appropriation as well? We're gonna delve deeper into it now by having a very brief look at a 2016 altercation that happened between a white male student whose name is Cory and a female at San Francisco State University.
You're saying that I can't have a hairstyle because of your culture?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's my culture. Do you know what box means?
Do you know it was in Egyptian culture? Are you Egyptian? Nah, bro, you're not.
Are you Egyptian? Are you Egyptian?
No, but it doesn't matter.
Wait, where's Egypt? Tell me.
You know what, girl?
Where's Egypt?
Dude, go. You have no right to tell me what I can not wear. Huh?
Where's Egypt?
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now.
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now. Come back.
Get off of me.
Come back, come back, come back. You put your hands on me, no murder.
Like, you make sense and shit because of what the hair I have? That's no reason, yo. I don't need your disrespect. I don't need your disrespect.
Why are you filming this?
Just for everyone's safety.
So Cory argued that it's his hair and he can do whatever he wants with it to express himself.
I didn't want to talk or discuss the situation with her at all. I felt that I didn't need to explain myself, my hair, my rules, my body. It's not even part of the colored community's culture. Like, it may be ingrained in it, but it's ingrained in so many cultures other than that. It's an Egyptian culture. It's in Viking culture. You'll see in Victorian culture that there is information about them having dreadlocks too. Like, it's everywhere. It's not something that is just part of the colored community. Someone having locks, which is found universally across the world, not just within African culture, but everywhere actually, that is not cultural appropriation in my view.
This is where I'm gonna start arguing both sides. So just a heads up, what I'm about to say here doesn't mean I'm siding with Cory or with the female student. If you watch the altercation, her only argument really was that the hairstyle belonged to her people, and that as a white person, Cory had no business wearing it. We've already debunked the idea that dreadlocks solely belong to African people and African culture. So purely based off that, her argument is invalid. Also, a side note, she was physical with Cory, which is never a good idea, especially when it comes to someone you haven't even spoken to before, you've never met, presumably, and she just seems to have decided to deal with it in that way, which really is not a good look and is not a good representation of how other Black people feel about this topic. But anyways, that's just a side note. You should be able to do whatever you want to do with your hair, as long as you're not overstepping boundaries and you're not taking credit, or you're not being inappropriate in any way. For example, walking around and wearing a native Indian headdress that symbolizes leadership, you've got nothing to do with that. It's purely related to a particular culture and a particular rank in society as well. So walking around with a native Indian headdress, very arguable that is cultural appropriation. But the issue here is white people wore dreadlocks too back in the day. So it just stops being a matter of cultural appropriation at that point. Cory also makes another valid point in his video.
The fact that I have locks does not mean that I'm trying to appropriate aliens' culture. It means that I love and respect their culture, and it's something that I hold true to myself. I feel like these differences are not something that separate us, but are something that should bring us closer together.
Color and hair type is so variable and so diverse amongst the human race. That's another point that makes it very difficult to claim something as your own. I have a white friend, for example, a guy. He is white, blue-eyed, light hair, like as white as they can be, and his hair naturally grows out into an afro. And in fact, he sported that look for a while during his high school years. Is that cultural appropriation? Does he have a responsibility as a white male to shave his hair and make sure it never grows out because, God forbid, he walks around with an afro? Where do we draw the line? And what about people of color, Black women who don't have naturally straight or wavy hair? For the most part, Black women have very curly hair. So what about when they wear weaves or wigs or extensions that are straight, or basically any hairstyle that isn't natural to their hair type? Is that cultural appropriation? Are we being too harsh and restrictive on white people of today's world, who are in no way responsible for the atrocious things that their ancestors may have done? And I'm talking, yes, slavery and basically treating people of color as second-class citizens. People today, for the most part, are very accepting of each other, at least in comparison to the past. Sometimes it really seems like we're giving minorities or people who aren't white a pass, and they can express themselves however they want, color their hair whatever color, straighten it, curl it, wave it, perm it, whatever. They can do it. But then as soon as a white person tries to experiment with their hair and their look and deviates away from the norm of how a white person looks like, they're attacked and demonized and vilified and accused of cultural appropriation and racism. I will leave you to answer that in the comment section below. I'm going to move on to the opposing side now. Firstly, regardless of the historical origins of dreadlocks, which we now know are varied, in today's world, they are very strongly linked to Rastafarian culture or African culture. The thing is, a lot of people of color, men, women, face backlash when they have dreadlocks. For example, a Black woman by the name of Jamia Wilson had this to say about her experiences as a Black woman who had dreadlocks in her hair. Writer and longtime locks lover Jamia Wilson began adopting the look 10 years ago as a return to her natural state. She loves her locks, but acknowledges they come with baggage. Relatives initially worried they might jeopardize job prospects. A professor advised her to straighten her hair if she wanted to make it in broadcast journalism. There have been times when reactions to her hair have made her feel unsafe. Strangers occasionally approach her for drugs. A homeless man once called her a dirty-haired bitch for not giving him money. She wonders whether white people with dreadlocks go through the same things. Hairstyles are not innocuous, she said. There are gendered and racialized connotations and stereotypes attached to them. If you're going to take on something that does have sacred and historic significance and an unequal history of power dynamics, it's important to honor that story, she said. Be an ally by knowing your stuff and being respectful and acknowledging where it comes from. On the last point that she made, I don't know if she was trying to say that you can wear dreadlocks as long as you acknowledge that they are of African origin, because we have already established that they're not. So if that's what she's trying to say, then again, it's kind of an invalid argument. But I think it's a good thing to bear in mind, especially as someone, and not just for white people. You have to remember that other races can be racist as well. Other races can be guilty of cultural appropriation. We need to get this notion out of our head that only white people can be racist. And if any other race does it, then it's reverse racism. I've heard that term thrown around so much, and it's always boggled my mind. It's like, how can you be a reverse racist? What I'm trying to say is she makes a good general point of, if you're going to, you know, don a certain hairstyle or borrow from a certain culture, just make sure you do your research and find out whether it's appropriate to do so. Don't just do it mindlessly. I think that's what she's trying to say. Before I read this article, I honestly had no idea that people of color or black people with dreadlocks are discriminated against purely because of the fact that their hair was in dreadlocks. Now, this is where it becomes interesting, because are they being discriminated against because of their hair, or is it really a racial issue? So for example, let's say I work in a law firm and I have this colleague, a lawyer, a white male, and he has long blonde hair that he decided to style in dreadlocks. And he shows up to work as a lawyer dressed up in a suit, and no one takes issue with it. Now let's say his black counterpart also shows up with dreadlocks, looking just as professional and just as presentable as his white colleague. But a partner in the firm pulls aside the black man and tells him that his hair is not professional, it makes him look messy, clients aren't going to take him seriously, he's going to ruin the image of the firm, etc., etc., etc. That is no longer an issue about dreadlocks. Anyone who pretends otherwise is being either willfully ignorant or just downright ignorant. I don't want to say stupid because I don't want to offend anyone, but you're just completely ignorant if you think the hair is the issue. It's not the hair. It's the fact that that partner who pulled aside the black man or the black employee is racist. It comes down to the color of people's skin. It transcends hair. It has nothing to do with it. Now, if both of them were pulled aside and told, your hair is inappropriate, we can't have you working with clients and going to court and facing judges with this hairstyle, then yes, at that point, it's about dreadlocks being considered as a messy or a dirty or an unkempt look. But from what I've read from Jamia's experiences, she has been discriminated against, particularly when she started wearing her hair in dreadlocks. So it seems as though white people are given a pass, and if they're wearing their hair in dreadlocks, then they're fine. But as soon as a person of color does it, then they're dirty and drug dealers. Then I see where people of color are coming from when it comes to the opposition of white people having dreadlocks. Because at that point, and this may be where the female from the altercation is coming from, it becomes a matter of, if my people can't wear this hairstyle, which is very natural to our hair type, then why should your people be able to get away with it? For all we know, that girl may have been called up in the past about having dreadlocks. Maybe she had to get rid of them because she couldn't get a job, or her professor pulled her aside and told her, you can't wear your hair like that if you're expecting to be taken seriously. Like Jamia's professor. So we don't know what happened to that girl. We don't know what her backstory is. We don't know what inspired such anger and aggression towards Cory. And if that's how she feels, then I completely understand how valid an argument that can be to a person of color. Now that we've argued both sides, it's time to come to a verdict. When it comes to Trisha, because of, and she acknowledges this in a recent video that she made, because of her history as a troll, and let's face it, her ongoing status as a troll, people always assume that she's trolling. You just never know with her. If she didn't mean it, then people need to cut her some slack. If she did, then again, it goes back to this entire video. Well, who's to say she can't wear dreadlocks? It's not like they belong to a particular culture. I am honestly I'm still confused about this. I am, because when I was younger, when I was like 7 or 8, my mom had a friend from Ethiopia, and her entire head was braided, her hair, and it was beautiful. And I remember being in such awe of her hair, and she offered to braid it for me herself. We didn't suggest it. And she did it twice on 2 separate occasions. Each occasion it took 4 hours, because I don't know if you can tell, but I have a lot of hair. And it was beautiful. I kept it for a month every time she did it. And I got so many compliments in school from people outside, strangers. You know, I was a little girl. So there was no concept of cultural appropriation back then. And this was like early 2000s. So I just wonder whether we as a society are... Like, I appreciate that we are becoming more politically correct, more PC, and it's required. But there is a fine line, and I think sometimes we can overstep it by being too overzealous and too us versus them, as opposed to let's try to be more universal about things. Are we taking hair too seriously. And I'm specifically talking about hair here, not being PC. Because, for example, blackface is completely inappropriate, and thank God we now recognize that as a society. Was I wrong in running around with braids throughout my hair because I'm not Black? Was my mother wrong in allowing that to happen? Was her Ethiopian friend wrong in offering to braid my hair? I would love some answers from you guys. I haven't really braided my hair since then. I don't know where I stand on this. I just feel like the only way I can wrap it up nicely in a bow is do your research before you decide to adopt something or hop onto a trend. Make sure it's not cultural appropriation. Make sure it's not insensitive and inappropriate. Find out the origins and the reasons why certain cultures decided to express themselves in a certain way. The moral of the story is do your research. Even if you really like something and you appreciate it, make sure it's appropriate to do so. So I've argued both sides, and I'm leaving it open to you to give me the final verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I upload 3 times a week, and I hope to see you in a future video.